Going to start my presentation. All right, so I'll be starting with an overview of the project, and Sravan with BKF will follow me and get into more of the technical detail, and Annika with Restoration Design Group will follow Sravan. And I'll put my contact information on at the end so you can contact me. We also have a website with updates on the project. We'll be updating it regularly. It has the URL on the bottom of the screen, but you can also find it by using the search function on the Moraga website. So the project is located at the Hacienda de las Flores. The picture on the left, it shows kind of a bird's eye view of the pavilion building, and the project area would be below the picture, sort of where the large text is. The picture on the right, that shows the upstream end of the culvert. The creek enters a culvert at this location, and you can see the pavilion in the background. And this culvert the project involves removing this culvert and creating a natural channel. And the reason is because the culvert is undersized. And as you can see on the picture on the left, there's flooding at the hacienda. This was in 2005. And it ultimately, you can see the sandbags in front of the doors. It overtopped the sandbags and did extensive damage to the building. On the picture on the right, you can see more damage to the site. You can also see where the water level was, more or less, based on that debris. So it really was a large flow event. So in 2014, 10 alternatives were studied to correct this problem. Those are the 10 alternatives. I won't go through each one. After extensive hydraulic analysis and economic analysis, it was determined that only the 10th alternative to daylight and restore the creek in this location would achieve the goals of protecting the pavilion from the 100-year storm and would be economically feasible. So the project consists of removing the 8-foot diameter culvert that we saw the picture of. So this picture on the right shows where the new creek would be. It's a schematic, so it's not totally accurate, but it's that's where the new creek would be. Currently, the culvert runs under that location. We'll be constructing the new natural channel and creating a habitat. The green is intended to show the new habitat. There's a sanitary sewer running through here currently that needs to be relocated. And we'll be creating a bridge over the creek at this location to maintain vehicular access from Moraga Road. So Town Council directed staff to seek grant funding, and staff applied for and received 3 major grants. One was from the California Natural Resources Agency, which is a state grant. We got a local grant from the East Bay Regional Parks District, and a federal grant from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. These grants impose some constraints on the project. For example, creating new habitat. These grants all require new habitat. Each one has various constraints. So we're a little limited by the constraints of the grants, but that's what comes with getting grant funding. So there'll be some other opportunities to participate in the near future. So tonight's our workshop. On March 2nd, we'll be doing a presentation for the Planning Commission at their regular meeting. And on March 16th, we'll be doing a presentation for the Parks and Recreation Commission. And on March 24th, we'll be doing an update for the council and presenting our findings from the public outreach and the other meetings. And we'll post any changes to this on the website, so please do check it regularly. So to reiterate, we're here to answer questions, provide updates, but most importantly, we're here to receive public input. So I do hope people will participate. This picture here is a red-legged frog, which is an endangered species that we're creating new habitat for. So it's an important aspect of the project, is the creation of new red-legged frog habitat. And this is my contact information. And do feel free to contact me, my phone number, my email. It's also on the website. You can email me directly on the website as well. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And so Shravan's going to take over from here, and he'll give a presentation going into more of the technical detail. They'll cover things like the trail, which I didn't cover. It's going to be an important aspect of the project. So take it away, Shravan.
Thank you, Mark. Dane, if you want to share the screen. There you go. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Shravan Paladigu. I'm with BKF Engineers. We are supporting the town with the engineering design aspects. I'm a project manager in the water resources group. So this is what I do on a daily basis. Mostly work on creek restoration and flood control projects. Also joining us today is a restoration design group. As Mark mentioned, they're also helping us and the town with the landscape design and the trail design. I will talk through some of the civil engineering design, constraints and opportunities, and I will then lead to restoration design group to talk about more of the landscape aesthetics and the trail. Next slide. Okay. So as Mark mentioned, this is the primary goal of the project is to provide flood protection to the pavilion. And, through their extensive alternative analysis that looked at 10 different alternatives, it was decided that the flood protection can be achieved by daylighting the creek, which will also enhance the aesthetic value of the pavilion. Next slide. So, there are several physical constraints that limit our ability to daylight the creek or to meander the creek through the site. It's not obvious just looking at this slide here, but some of the constraints that we have to work around include the pavilion structure itself and the courtyard walls, which are one of which are one of the biggest constraints that define the alignment of the channel or the creek. The other constraint is, as Mark mentioned, the Contra Costa Sanitation District sewer line, which is a main trunk line that runs through the site, which lies right in the alignment of the proposed creek daylighting. There's also a PG&E power pole that restricts, how we can meander the creek through the site. Maintaining access for the fire truck and maintaining the circulation from Moraga Road is another constraint. The existing retaining wall that was installed in 2013 to provide some flood protection, is another constraint. And also the steep hillside slope to the east is another constraint. So all these physical constraints, really define the project. And these are all in addition to the grant funding constraint, or the limited grant funding we have available to build this project. Next slide. Next slide, Dan. Okay. So with all these constraints, the design team, in working with the town, was able to identify a alignment and creek geometry that can provide 100-year flood protection, which is the main goal of the project. Some of the features of the daylighted creek include a 10 to 15 feet deep channel, as shown in this cross section here. So the pavilion is on the right side here, and the maintenance yard is on the left here. Let's see. So, in addition to the channel, we are adding some of the drop structures and pools to make it more aesthetically pleasing for a year-round flow. So the open channel will have a conspan bridge. Let's see, right here to provide access for the fire truck. Next slide. So these are some of examples of how the conspan bridge looks. It's an open channel. It has an open channel that provides for a natural, open bottom channel, provides some habitat value, and it would have some head walls and wing walls to retain the soil next to the pavilion and the steep hillside slope. Next slide. So in addition to some of the physical constraints, there were some environmental constraints. In 2013, when the head wall was installed on the north side or the upstream side, the permitting staff has found red-legged frogs in the plunge pool areas. So part of the project is to mitigate for those, mitigate for the plunge pool. So the team has, spread out the, the habitat value that was provided by the existing plunge pool throughout the channel by providing drop structures. In addition to that, the daylighted channel will provide some floodplain bench and other amenities to that enhances the overall aesthetics of this area. With that, I will hand it over to Annika to talk about to get into more details on the landscape aesthetics and the trail design.
Thank you so much, Shravan. And Dane, let's see what the next slide is, since things have shuffled a bit. So I'm Annika Swinehart, and I am the design director at Restoration Design Group, and we are on the team to support BKF, both with the landscape planting and the public access design. And what that means is that we're looking at how this new landscape and the new creek interacts with the amenities you already have at the park, your current use of the pavilion, and how this restoration project could improve and add to the use and enjoyment of the pavilion, as well as increasing public access to a new section of creek and a new amenity for the town. I'll be going through the two different design alternatives that we're at this point. with the caveat that we are currently in this project at the 15% design phase. So we're very much in the concept phase, and we're looking at large scale alternatives before getting into further refinement. So I won't be talking to you about what plants we're going to plant or what things look like specifically. It's a much higher level review of where amenities are, what the general aesthetic of those is, and what the payoffs and the benefits are of the two different design alternatives we're looking at. And then we'll get into the very end with some more concrete preferences for you to discuss with the team and to let us know what you hope the future amenities look like. Next slide, please. So as mentioned by both Mark and Shravan, there are requirements tied to the money that is funding this. And this slide just gives you a sense of the variety of that. We've got linear feet to restore for the creek. We are providing aquatic habitat, as that very cute picture of the frog Mark provided shows. Those are the pools that Shravan showed in the last slide, the blue areas. There's going to be step pools, which are shallow, and deeper plunge pools, and that provides different habitat at different times of years, different time of the year for wildlife. And 22,550 square feet of riparian habitat, and that includes the banks and the slopes of the new creek. So that also means that we're not just taking out trees to do the grading. We're going to be doing intensive restoration planting along any of the new disturbed areas. And we're going to be realigning a portion of your existing trail system along this new creek bank. And of course, the primary goal, containing FEMA's 100-year flood, which has less to do with me and more to do with BKF, but it is definitely one of the prime goals of the project. Next slide. Challenges. So when we're looking at the design, as mentioned, there was lots of limitations on how we can wiggle the creek, where we can put the trail, and how all the puzzle pieces fit together. One of the big things is that the beloved pavilion is actually probably sitting directly in the historic channel for the creek. So we're working around that to protect this building and still provide a geometry and a shape for the creek that's sustainable, that will allow the flood to not be limited in a tight pipe, but to absorb into the soil and into plants and provide a lot of benefits both for the town people and for the town habitat and wildlife. Because we're in a tight spot, this isn't going to be a 100% natural creek. We will have some armored sections and some retaining walls, which you'll see in the drawings that come up. So it's a blended project at this point in order to fit it into the space that we have. Next slide. So given the limitations of the space, the two design alternatives we're going to walk through really come down to two primary differences: the width in the scale of the bridge that's going over the creek, which is called a conspan bridge, which is just the style of a Contech prefabricated open channel bridge. And what that does is it allows us to move the ADA parking from one side of the pavilion or the other. And by moving it, we get a smaller bridge. By leaving it in place, we require a larger bridge. And because we're at the 15% design, BKF is still doing design studies on the grading. So there may be other minor subtle changes to slopes, amounts of grading, lengths of retaining walls, but design-wise, it doesn't impact what it's going to feel like for a user to move through the space more than what we're showing here. So with that said, can you go to the next screen, Dane? Alternative one. So what you're looking at here is an aerial view of the project site with a topographic map of the proposed grading on top of it, with color coding for the different amenities and features that will be part of the project. On the right-hand side, you can see the labeled box culvert, which is the existing outflow for the creek, and the Hacienda Gate at the corner of Moraga Road and Devon. And right there, thank you very much. And the gold thread winding through your existing oaks and then tucking in along the top bank of that creek, can you go back a page, is the new proposed trail connection from Hacienda Gate along the top of a new creek bank, which then connects to the rest of the trails, the La Sala Trail, further to the east, further to the west of the pavilion. And there's a little pullout with 2 benches and a chair right there along the top of the creek to provide a place to stop and sit. With your existing trail system in the park, you have lots of little benches, chess tables tucked into planting areas, and sort of smaller scale spaces for people to rest and enjoy the natural area that's there. This would also be an area that would be accessible for pavilion users. The purple arrows show the connection from the existing gates of the pavilion wall to that trail. And there would be a desire to have that be connected so that if you were having a party or a rental or an event in the pavilion, if you wanted to step out and walk along the creek or have a toast or have a quiet moment, you could step away from the party and then come back. The green area in between the trail and the pavilion wall is what we'll be talking about in the next slide, but I don't want to go there yet. In this slide for alternative 1, the heavy black lines that you see along the creek, those are the retaining walls, the wing walls for the new bridges that Sravan was talking about. The existing wall is sort of shown as white along the western edge. So you're going to be keeping that existing wall that's there, and we're going to be putting in a new bridge with new wing walls and new grading. And this alternative has a much smaller bridge. It's only about 35 feet wide. And by narrowing the bridge, you get more daylit creek area, more natural creek, and less expensive in general. What it does do, though, is it pinches in a bit at that corner of the pavilion, and it requires us to move the ADA parking over to the front side of the pavilion. So you'll notice there's a parking spot moved to the front, which would utilize your existing handicap access ramp up into the pavilion. It would remove the existing aggregate sidewalk that sort of dead ends into the retaining wall of the ramp, and expands the asphalt by about 3 feet to allow for passage of fire trucks and circulation through the existing driveway. But it all tucks in quite nicely with minimal impact. None of the existing mature planting around the pavilion would need to be changed. We would be taking out a sidewalk and rotating the parking to have this smaller bridge and larger creek for alternative 1. So that's the primary plan. And the green shading on either side of the creek is that restoration planting area. We'll be putting in new oaks, new riparian plants, and sort of establishing some native habitat there to support this new daylit creek you're going to have. If you can go to the next page, there's an enlargement. And so this view is showing just an enlargement of that corner with the rotated parking and the views through the pavilion. The current pavilion wall is perforated. There's lights and sort of lattice panels in that wall which provide views out. Right now, part of that view is being blocked by the shed. The shed will be gone, and there'll be new ornamental planting between that pavilion wall and the creek trail. So there would be a buffer between events and the public experience of the creek trail. It would also allow for nice filtered views through those lattice to ornamental planting. And part of what we'll be doing as we progress the design of the project is working at blending in the new planting with the existing planting that exists around the pavilion. Next slide. And so this is showing that orange square is showing where that new ADA parking would go in the front of the pavilion. And you can see the existing sidewalk that sort of dead ends into the retaining wall for that curb. We would be taking that sidewalk out and putting the parking in, but the sidewalk that comes from the large set of stairs to the main gate on the, if you wave your hand over to down farther, down farther, down farther to the right, the bottom right-hand corner of the map, even farther. There we go. Those are the stairs that descend from the road down to the main pavilion gates. That sidewalk system would all remain intact and would connect through to the front of the pavilion. So that's where we're proposing to shift the ADA parking in order to have this smaller bridge. And it also allows for a more seamless connection of your trailway system, where the creek trail would be unimpeded as it comes across that asphalt area and connects to the trails on the other side of the bridge. It also improves your hospitality access and your service access through that gate to the pavilion courtyard for catering, event organizers. Once the pandemic is under control, people are going to want to have outdoor parties still. And this would allow for easier access to that side gate without interrupting the front of the pavilion. So next slide. So alternative 2, you'll notice the trail is in exactly the same place. We've located that trail from the Hacienda Gate in such a way as to avoid your existing mature trees and have a variety of experience, so that you're moving through the existing woodland, and then you're coming out and hugging the top of the bank for more of a creek experience and pulling users away from the pavilion before connecting to the rest of the trail. And that really is where we feel the trail needs to be in order to have both of those experiences and provide the public with access to the restoration project. In this alternative, however, we have a much wider bridge. It's about 55 feet wide, and you can see the extent of that there. And this is necessary if we want to keep the ADA parking tucked onto that eastern side of the pavilion. We need to have the wider span of the bridge in order to provide backup space for anyone who's utilizing that parking space onto the bridge to be able to get out. So that having this wider bridge allows us to leave the parking exactly where it is and allows us to leave the front of the pavilion untouched. Circulation would remain the same. All the sidewalks would remain where they were, and we would not change the configuration of the road in any way. What it does do, though, is it blocks the trail and it blocks the service entrance to the side of the pavilion if that space is ever occupied. So if someone were to park in the ADA parking space, it would block the trail connection next to the creek, and it would block any other vehicle from having access to that side gate to the pavilion. But otherwise, the trail and the creek overlook would still be in the same place, and you would still have access at the other end of the pavilion out to the creek trail. So if you can go to the next slide. And this is just an enlargement of that parking configuration with the larger bridge. And this shows you where your existing ADA parking currently is at the pavilion. It's tucked around the corner next to a service entrance door. And you can see the shadow of the gate in the photograph, and there's a little orange arrow indicating where that connection is. So if we want to leave the parking over here kind of tucked behind, we need to have a much larger bridge in place to allow that to safely remain. So those are the two main differences between the plans, is the size of the bridge and the location of the parking. Everything else about the landscape design is fairly consistent, just due to the sort of tight, limited space that we're working in. And if you go to the next slide, there are some choices that we can make about the trail itself. On the right-hand side of the slide are pictures of the existing trails. This one is, the top one is taken right by that existing wing wall on the far side of the pavilion. It's mostly mulch, dirt surfacing. It's not improved as a hard surface. They're very natural, very rustic, very informal trail system. And the bottom picture on the right is of the existing Hacienda Gate. which again, when you come through the gate, there isn't a clear delineation of where your trails are. You're entering a natural area. There's some signposts, but it's very informal, and it's a mulched woodland setting, which is one aesthetic. We have the option for a very minimal cost increase. It is an upgrade to having that trail be defined and be in a stabilized, decomposed granite surface. This would allow for people with mobility issues, younger people, people who are renting the pavilion, who are perhaps wearing nicer shoes that don't want to walk through a rustic mulched path, to have another way of access that doesn't involve the stairs from the main road or arriving in a vehicle or down the asphalt. So there's some strong benefits to the upgrade and to providing a defined circulation through the existing oak woodland, both to limit impact to the rest of the area, so that you're not having people just moving through the space at will, but you're providing them with a defined path through that existing woodland that leads them to the creek trail and brings them to the pavilion amenities. So that's one of the things that the design team and the engineering team would like feedback on is the current aesthetic and the current trail type and style what we want to move forward with for the renovations of the pavilion, or do we want to look at formalizing and delineating them in another way? And even if it isn't decomposed granite, even if it's just having, headers and a defined mulch path and leaving, the rest of it natural, that's another option as well. And it's really about, the rustic mulch, undefined, informal versus a more defined, formal pathway from the Hacienda Gate to the pavilion. Next slide. The other aesthetic consideration for this project, which will ripple through to sort of the guardrail along that creek walkway and the creek overlook, is how we want to deal with the guardrail requirements for this new bridge. Your existing culvert and wing wall at the site has dealt with that barrier by having a solid 4-foot high, basically a wall extension from the wing wall. So it's a solid wall that you lean on, you can't see through it. It's a very beefy barrier. And that is an option to continue for the other wing walls and for the bridge. The disadvantages of that are cost and lack of visual permeability. It's a solid concrete wall. We have the option of keeping the concrete more as a curb. So the wing walls would only come up, to like 6 inches above the finished grade of the new project grading design, and then having a guardrail mounted on that. And on the lower left-hand side are sort of the guardrails and the fence styles that are present in the park right now. They're not to current code, but they are wooden, they're rustic, and they're very much in keeping with the rest of the historic nature of the buildings and the spaces around there. So it's much more of a natural material aesthetic right now, where you have stone, you have wood railing, you have rustic post and rail fences. So when we're looking at what we want to install on the new bridge and on the new walls, we do have the option of putting in to code either wood veneered on metal for the vehicle barrier, and then just wood for the pedestrian barrier, wood and wire guardrails, or we could go to a more modern, streamlined, metal guardrail, which would be lower cost, but maybe not the direction you want to go for the pavilion. But we do have a requirement to have, protective barriers on this new bridge. And if we want to stick with sort of matching the aesthetic that's there now and having it be a raised concrete wall, do we want to try and blend in with the existing wood that's on site and have a wooden guardrail that's to code, or are we okay going to a metal mounted guardrail on the new bridge. And that's feedback that would help us make decisions when we're balancing costs and design and how to achieve the look and feel that the town and people want for the pavilion while still providing for safety and solid design. And with that, I can hand it over to Mark to open up the field to any questions or comments about the design in general, aesthetics, habitat, flood control. Sravan can answer all of those questions too.
Yeah, if you want to stop sharing your screen for so we can bring us back on. And if BJ is listening, I think you might have me highlighted so that I'm showing up larger.
No, I don't. I don't have you highlighted.
Okay, I got some messages that I was appearing during the presentation. I had my picture up. So fortunately, someone texted me so I could turn off my camera. So it was a lot of information, and so we hope that people will have lots to say about it. I do see one hand up.
Carrie has a question.
And BJ, are you going to be, or is Dane going to be unmuting people?
And I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I actually have not yet received my packet for the March 2nd Planning Commission meeting, so I didn't know that this was going to be one of the items we discussed. I'm likely going to have to recuse from that discussion because I live at 7 El Paraiso Court, which is the outfall of the second culvert. Actually, the creek leaves the culvert on my property. I did have some questions about the hydrology, how the change. I love the fact that the town is getting around to actually restoring the creek in this section. I have mixed feelings though now that I recently moved to have a section of this on my property. I did see some of the Q&A documents from I believe last year that said that the scope, the initial conceived scope was going to be within the hacienda boundaries, but it would be up to the consultants whether or not it expanded further south or elsewhere. And I just wanted to see what again, since a stretch of this goes through the back end of my property, what the chance is that the Scope Creek will continue on down further the channel.
Got it. Can you also introduce yourself, Carrie, just so we...
Absolutely. Sorry. Carrie Hillis, Vice Chair, Planning Commission, but I was here strictly in the context of being a Moraga resident.
Yeah. So the Planning Commission, there's nothing decision to be made on it. It's just a presentation to provide an update. So
great. Thank you.
So did you want to ask specific questions about that? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch if you had a question.
I think you were asking about scope creep, right? And whether the current extent of the restoration project, if there was any risk or danger of it expanding out of what was shown tonight. Was that the question?
Correct. So my property, the bound, I went in Google Earth, it looks like I'm about 340 feet from the hacienda gate, but that second box culvert, which I believe was 12 by 14, runs underneath the backside of my property. So it would be what would be the chance that this would that the scope would creep down that far?
About zero, I think. I'm saying that boldly, but I think that the financial limitations for what we're doing, there isn't really room or bandwidth to do the studies beyond the scope of what we're doing now. And the good news is that by pulling the creek out of the pipe that's, in the location it's at, is that we're going to be reducing velocities and pressures on what's going to be arriving at your property.
Okay.
So I don't think there's any room financially for this project to get any bigger. It may get a little bit smaller, but it's not going to get bigger, and it's going to make your life a little bit safer and more stable. And hopefully full of frogs. We'll see.
I hope so. I can hear them up, like we go out in our backyard. Like sometimes they actually are in our drainage pipes. You can hear them croaking at each other in there.
Oh, lucky.
One question I also have on the comment for the DG path is, I would say that, you know, when for families that have young children with strollers, it is fairly difficult to push a stroller over the wood chips. You know, I can do it, my wife and our nanny cannot. So it definitely would make it accessible to more to younger families, and also, as you pointed out, to other people with you know, dressed differently or with other challenges that are enjoying the area. And I also like the fact that the trail would provide access to the lower area. It seems to me that it's a no-brainer on the ADA parking spot, just for access and also for folks to be able to enjoy the area. The first option you presented just seems to be the one that really just checks all the boxes. I saw this as a project that was on our unfunded long-term project list for a couple of years, and it's nice to see that this is one that we're actually moving forward on.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Yeah, I would agree with Annika that the extent of the project is to the entrance, the Hacienda side entrance of that 12 by 14 reinforced culvert box, and the chances of it going any further, I don't see any chance of that for this.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, not only with this project, I don't foresee even in future daylighting that portion of the culvert. That culvert really supports Devon Drive, right? So there's no, I don't foresee taking out that culvert and adding a bridge to Devon Drive. So it's not a constraint that we need to deal with.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And we have Tom has a question.
Hi, Tom.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Great presentation. Really appreciate what's going on over there. I think it'll be a big improvement to the Hacienda when it's done. I have a few questions. First, regarding the cost, it looked to me like when I read through some of the materials, that the total cost is in the 1.5 million range. Is that correct?
The total cost, yeah, it's being estimated now at about that. Basically, that was an older estimate from a few years ago that we escalated based on a CPI for construction costs. And it came to 1.58, I believe.
And if we add up the three grants that were received, how much money is coming from grant, and how much, if it is 1.5 million, how much would be coming from the town?
Well, we're currently looking at keeping the project down at 1.2. So that's currently what we have funding for, should FEMA continue to fund this project. And in that case, it's fully grant funded.
Okay.
The FEMA grant, right now they approved phase 1, which is the first part of the design. That's what we're in now. Once we finish this, they'll determine whether to continue the funding. So right now we have about 200,000 from FEMA, and the other grants, the East Bay Regional Parks District grant is about 600,000, and the California Natural Resources Agency grant is about 400,000.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Funding it entirely with grants to that's our goal here.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that goal too. I hope we can achieve that.
I hope so. Yeah.
Next is a comment, and it might sound really outside of the box, but we have a lot of creeks in Moraga, and something that always bothers me is, like, there's no way to get to any of the creeks, and a kid couldn't put their toes in a creek because they're just choked with poison oak. Would it be possible here to put a spur down to the creek so that you could actually walk down and touch the water? I realize the slope is fairly steep there.
I think in the reach between the pavilion and the Hacienda gate, it's going to be fairly steep. But you can currently kind of get down there at the end of the existing wing wall. I mean, that's something we can look at with grading, but it's pretty steep in there. So that might be a as comfortable moment.
You know,
Robin, do you have any
Sorry,
thoughts on that?
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the only area where I think you can get down, and even in that area, I mean, the slopes are at 2-to-1, so pretty steep to walk down. So you would have to have some kind of staircase down. And, you know, the area right next to the courtyard wall where you have some seating is probably the area where you can actually you'll be able to add some kind of staircase down, because that's where you have some floodplain bench where you can go down to. The rest of the creek is, you know, it's going to be deeper where you don't have the floodplain bench. So it would have to be, to answer your question, it would have to be more like a staircase access.
Okay.
Yeah. Tom, would you mind introducing yourself? I just want to keep people introducing themselves. I should have caught it earlier.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. I should have started with that. Yeah, Tom Shepard. I'm on the Parks and Rec Commission. I've been on for years.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll be seeing you a little later.
Yep. Looking forward to.
I have a question for you. So right now in the concept plans, we're showing fencing, like low barrier fencing between the creek trail and the slope down, the restoration slope down to the creek. And that is out of a deference to sort of general safety concerns and wanting to keep people out of a restoration area while it's growing in. But in terms of cost savings or providing access, having that fence be interrupted or less extensive than shown, is also a direction we could go in terms of making it a little bit of a softer edge for people down the road.
I really like the idea of it having a softer edge. And I also, again, back to my original question, I realize it would be technically difficult, but I would love to see some actual access to the water if there was any way to do it. And so we'll just leave that there. But for me, the more open it is, the better. But it would have to be maintained on some level, because otherwise it would just fill up with poison oak, and that would be a bit of an issue. So I got a couple of other questions too.
Please.
If I can move on, let's see here. So yeah, as far as the path goes, I agree that putting at least around where the pavilion is, if we can put an ADA surface such as decomposed granite, that would be a benefit. Maybe we don't do the whole trail in decomposed granite, but at least it should be accessible right around the pavilion. I agree, if there's a gathering there, it just makes that whole venue nicer if you can walk out and onto the trail, and it's not a rough trail, but a more accessible trail. Another question, are we going to have to remove any of the new $1 million retaining wall, or does that all stay in place?
So Shravan can go into more detail on that, but part of it has to be removed and part of it will be saved. But I don't know if you want to answer that in better detail, Shravan.
Yeah, so the portion that's actually retaining the seating area will stay. The portion where we're taking out the culvert, the 96-inch pipe, and putting in conspan, that portion we'll have to demo. I would say percentage wise, we're probably demoing, maybe 30% of that existing wall, right? In order to be able to fit a con span, which is much wider, which is almost 29 feet wide compared to the 9-foot diameter pipe that we have. So we will have to demo a portion of that wall that's facing the con span. But the portion that's retaining the seating area will remain in place.
Right. So when he talked about the seating area, we're talking about the portion of the wall on the pavilion side. So there's kind of a longer stretch closer toward the pavilion. And then there's the head wall, which is the perpendicular to the creek at the culvert entrance. From there over, it needs to be removed.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I was just curious on that. Another question, getting into the culvert, we have a lot of problems with culverts in Moraga, and I was just curious if anybody knows what the condition of that culvert is it rusted out, or is it in good shape? I know it needs to be removed one way or the other, but just curious what the condition is.
Well, the inside of it was repaired back in 2014, I believe. So the bottom had been rusted out and they grouted the bottom. It's not in great shape. There's actually a sewer lateral running through it. And it's probably not got a lot of time on it because it is an old steel pipe. But it's not, the bottom was repaired because it had rusted out. So that part was repaired.
Okay, all right. Last question. You brought up the railing, and as far as whether it be wood or steel or whatever, and if I had a comment on that, I'd say, it seems like a lot of railing in Moraga is wood, and I think, it's probably cheaper to do that, and it sort of ties into what we have in Moraga. So that would be my leaning on that, if anybody cares.
We do.
Of course we do, yeah.
I appreciate you answering all my questions. That's all I've got.
Do you have any thoughts on the two options of the ADA parking? Right.
I need to look at that a little bit more closely to visualize it better.
Sure.
ADA parking access is important, and I think the larger bridge cuts into the trail access, right? You're not going to be able to carry it through as well. But the smaller bridge, what's the downside with that? We have less parking?
No, there isn't really a downside to the smaller bridge. The downside would be if you found having the parking spot at the front of the pavilion next to the ramp aesthetically undesirable. The advantage of the smaller bridge is that it's more in scale with the pavilion and the road leading to it. So that's the main trade-off, is that you would have the ADA striping on the asphalt at the front of the pavilion rather than at the service entrance side.
I see. It's kind of hard for me to visualize that, so I guess I don't have a strong feeling. I do like the idea of a trail carrying through. That sounds nicer to me, but again, without kind of standing there and understanding it a little bit better, I can't say. And I will go down there and look at it. Maybe I'll take Brianna from Parks and Rec with me, and she could show me.
And Mark, will the slides be made available on the website? Because there are photos, Tom, with in the presentation with the outlines of where that new parking would be. That's shown.
Yeah, we can have the slides up on the website, and I'm also available, Tom, if you want to contact me to discuss it further or to meet you out there.
There we go. So there's the existing parking.
Yeah, it's a little hard to see where you are.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I would need to stand there and I would have a good opinion if I was there, but from the picture, it's a little hard to say.
Yeah.
I would like to go, either with you or with Brianna, and I guess I'm the rep for Parks and Rec. So if one of you could do that and show me, that would be great. I'm pretty flexible working at home like everybody else. So.
Yeah, one comment I wanted to make is go back to the next slide, Dane. Sorry. Were you sharing the slides, Dane? Or yeah. So, if we want to have a continuous trail next to the ADA parking, what we need to do is to extend the conspan culvert all the way up to here. We need to further extend the conspan in order to provide ADA, the trail access next to the ADA parking.
And what's the downside of that? Is that just more earth moving?
It's more extending conspan is expensive. It's just more structure, and you lose some of the daylight.
Structure and scale. You end up like that distance right there. I think is probably 55 feet, if I'm not mistaken.
The whole conspan is 55, and Tom, the gray is what would actually be the road, and the brown that is colored in on top of that conspan. There's only about 2 feet of soil cover on the top of the conspan bridge, so there wouldn't be planting there or the ability to really do much with it. You could have a sidewalk, you could have a trail going over the bridge, but it mostly would just kind of be dead space.
I see. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit more clear now. I guess I lean towards, a trail that would connect through. It looks like Brianna just texted me and said she wouldn't mind walking down there with me. So I'll try to arrange that in the near future.
Great. All right, well,
Thanks so much, Tom.
All right. Thank you.
see you on the 16th. Any other comments, questions, anything? We're happy to answer questions. We want to hear as much public feedback as we can.
This is Kerry Hillis again. I would just chime in and say that, if we're going to be doing this and restoring the creek, it would seem to make sense to try to have the most daylit section of the creek as you can get, and expanding the bridge further just kind of reduces some of that intent. This is an area that's going to be incredibly visible from Moraga Road. This is a community gathering place. I think that if it's my view is that if it's possible to move the ADA parking spot without making it any more inconvenient for somebody who needs to utilize that spot to access the building, that definitely makes sense. And having also the natural material for the railing also, I think, goes well with the overall aesthetic of the hacienda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see. Wait just another minute in case somebody wants to say anything else, comment or question or anything at all. Critique our presentations.
No hands.
All right. Well, I think we'll call it a night then. And thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to put my contact information back up. And I have to share my screen. And so, whoops, from current slide. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Sure can.
Yes.
Great. So that's my contact information. Feel free to contact me. The website's there, and we'll be posting updates. We'll post these slides. And so have a wonderful evening, and thank you for coming. And we'll go ahead and stop the meeting.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You
Annika,
all.
Shrivan. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks all.